Welcome to Reddit Mystery. Subscribe now, because some mysteries are too terrifying to ignore. 21, but something feels off. I never thought I'd be in this situation. 21 years old, never been on a date, and completely terrified of the idea. It wasn't that I didn't want to, more like I didn't know how. I was always the shy, socially awkward guy, the one who looked confident on the outside, but was a nervous wreck underneath. Still, loneliness has a way of pushing people beyond their comfort zones. So one night, on a whim, I downloaded a dating app. To my surprise, I actually got matches. A lot of them. But one girl stood out. Her name was Lena. She was confident, extroverted, and had this magnetic energy that pulled me in. We had mutual friends, which made me feel a bit safer. But still, I was nervous. When I jokingly told her, "What do you think about burgers and awkward silence?" she laughed and said, "I don't think you're quiet at all. You just need time to open up." That was reassuring. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. We agreed to meet on Friday night at a small cafe by the beach. It sounded casual, low pressure, perfect. But as Friday approached, something felt off. The date begins, and the unease grows. When I arrived, Lena was already there, sitting at a corner table. She looked just like her pictures, almost too much like them. No imperfections, no stray hairs, not even the slightest difference from her profile. Her smile was warm, but something about it felt rehearsed. "Hey, you actually showed up," she said playfully. I chuckled nervously. "Yeah, first date, gotta make a good impression, right?" She tilted her head slightly, her eyes fixed on me. "First date ever? Or first date in a while?" I hesitated. Ever." Her smile widened, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's cute." We talked for a while. She was engaging, charismatic, too perfect in her responses. It was as if she already knew exactly what I was going to say. Like she had heard this conversation before. At one point, I noticed her phone on the table. No notifications, no messages. Just blank, like it wasn't even on. Then she asked me something that sent a cold chill down my spine. "So, do you live alone?" Something is wrong. The way she asked it wasn't flirty. It wasn't casual. It was probing. Yeah. Why? Why? No reason." She stirred her drink, eyes locked onto me like she was analyzing every movement. I felt my hands go clammy. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe it was just nerves. Then, as we were about to leave, her expression changed, like she remembered something important. "You know," she said slowly, "this place is really quiet tonight." I glanced around. She was right. The cafe had been full when I arrived, but now we were the only ones there. Even the staff were gone. "Did they close already?" I asked. Lena just smiled. "I guess so." She stood up and offered me her hand. "Want to take a walk by the beach?" Something inside me screamed, "No!" The escape. I forced a polite smile. "Actually, I should head home, early morning tomorrow." For the first time all night, her expression shifted. Not disappointment. Something else. "Are you sure?" "Yeah, maybe next time." She didn't argue, just watched me. As I walked away, my heart pounded. I didn't look back. I just needed to get to my car. When I finally reached it, I exhaled in relief. Safe, or so I thought. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Lena. "Are you home yet?" I didn't reply. Then another message. "You shouldn't lie. I can still see you." Final note. I never told her where I parked. I never even told her what car I drove. But as I sped off, I glanced at my mirror. And I swear to God, she was standing there, in the middle of the empty road, smiling. It started with an old, half-empty whiskey bottle on the table, my dad's hands shaking as he poured himself another drink. He never drank much, not like this. But tonight was different. He had called me over out of nowhere, his voice trembling through the phone. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something I should have told you years ago." I sat down, the air between us thick with something unspoken. For as long as I could remember, my mother's disappearance had been a wound in our family, one that had never healed. She had left one evening when I was 5 and never came back. No goodbyes, no clues, just an empty space at the dinner table. At least, that's what I had always been told. But tonight, my father's eyes were filled with something I had never seen before. A kind of haunted fear that made the room feel colder. He took a deep breath, stared at his glass, then finally spoke. "She didn't leave us." His voice cracked. "She was taken." My stomach dropped. He hesitated before continuing, his fingers tapping anxiously against the table. "It was the woods," he whispered, "the ones behind our old house. Your mother, she knew something was wrong with them. She told me over and over that she felt like something was watching her when she went outside. At first, I laughed it off, thought she was just imagining things. But then you started waking up at night screaming, saying there was someone standing outside your window." A chill ran down my spine. I barely remembered those nights, just flashes of something dark, something moving between the trees. "One night," he continued, "she heard you crying in your room. She got up to check on you, but when she opened the door, you weren't there. The bed was empty." I felt my breath hitch. "But I was there," I stammered. "I never went missing." His hands gripped the table, knuckles white. "That's what I thought too. But when she ran outside, she saw you, another you, standing at the edge of the woods. You were just standing there, staring at her. But your face, she said it wasn't right. It was like something was wearing your skin, but it didn't know how to make the face move properly." I felt nausea creep up my throat. "She ran toward you, and the thing, it ran too, straight into the woods. She followed, and that was the last time I saw her." His voice cracked. "An hour later, I found you sleeping peacefully in your bed, like nothing had ever happened." The room was spinning. She thought she was chasing you, but I think it was luring her." He buried his face in his hands, and I let her go. I couldn't breathe. My mind was screaming at me that this wasn't real, that my dad was just drunk and rambling. But then I remembered something. A dream. A memory. A woman's voice calling my name. Running. The feeling of something cold gripping my wrist, dragging me toward the woods. And then, nothing. I looked at my father, his face broken, and for the first time in my life, I saw him cry. Then, the worst part. "She's still out there," he whispered. "I hear her calling your name at night." My blood ran cold, because so had I. And now I had to know the truth. This with added mystery and tension. Title: The Eyes in the Darkness. I grew up at the edge of a vast, untamed forest in the deep south, a place where the night whispered secrets only the trees could understand. My family had lived there for generations, tending to the land, keeping to ourselves. Life was quiet until the night everything changed. For weeks, something had been disturbing my mother's garden. We thought it was armadillos or raccoons, maybe even a coyote. Every morning, we'd find deep claw marks in the soil, vegetables torn from their roots, the ground churned up like something had been digging, searching. So, every night, I took my shotgun and did my rounds. That evening was thick with humidity, the kind that clung to your skin and made the air feel heavy. The cicadas screamed in the trees, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. It was just another night, or so I thought. As I reached the backyard, something changed. The sound of insects, the rustling leaves, even the distant croak of frogs. Everything stopped. Dead silence. Not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that raises the hairs on your neck. I gripped my shotgun tighter, my flashlight slicing through the dark as I scanned the tree line. My breath was the only sound now, ragged and uneven. Then I saw them, a pair of glowing red eyes. They hovered at the edge of the trees, locked onto me. At first, I thought it was a deer or a coyote. But no, these eyes were too high off the ground, at least 4 feet up. And worse, there was nothing attached to them. No body, no shape, just 2 burning red orbs staring at me from the abyss. A cold dread seeped into my bones. I've hunted in these woods my whole life. I've seen panthers, mountain lions, even stared down a black bear once. But this was different. I raised my shotgun, finger trembling on the trigger. "Get out of here!" I barked, my voice more nervous than I wanted to admit. The eyes didn't move, didn't blink, didn't shift. They just watched. Then I fired. The shotgun blast ripped through the silence, the fireball lighting up the night for a fraction of a second. But when the darkness returned, the eyes were still there. And this time they growled. Not an animal growl, not something from this world. It was deep, guttural, vibrating through my ribs like an earthquake. It felt wrong, like it came from the earth itself, something ancient, something that had no business being here. I stumbled back, reloading as fast as my shaking hands allowed. The eyes began moving, slowly, deliberately, gliding toward me, still unattached to anything I could see. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, firing blindly behind me, the sound of my own shotgun blasts drowning out the blood pounding in my ears. I barely made it to the house. I slammed the door, flipping on the floodlights. My hands fumbled for the lock, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then, from the other side of the door, a hiss, like steam hitting fire, like something furious, something wrong. And just like that, the eyes vanished. I stayed up the whole night, gun in my lap, watching the backyard through the window. They never came back. But sometimes, just sometimes, when I step outside late at night, I feel them. Watching, waiting. And I know deep down, whatever it was that stared at me that night, it wasn't done with me yet. This version adds more suspense, mystery. The room my son refused to enter. We moved into a new house about a year ago so that our son, who turns 4 next month, could finally have his own room. The transition was smoother than expected. He loved his space, filled it with his toys, and bedtime routines went off without a hitch. Most nights, he'd drift off after a couple of stories and a goodnight kiss. He wasn't scared of the dark, had nightlights, and we always kept his door slightly open. Then, on July 4th, everything changed. That afternoon, he spent hours happily playing in his room. But that night, out of nowhere, he refused to go back inside. He wouldn't step foot in his room, insisting on sleeping with us. If we tried to bring him in, he'd scream and cling to us. If we managed to get him inside for just a second, maybe to grab a toy, he'd immediately run back out, as if the room itself was unbearable. At first, we assumed he had a nightmare. But it didn't make sense. He had no problem using the bathroom right across the hall, but he demanded that the bathroom door stay shut at all times. If we left it open, he would panic. And every time we asked him what was wrong, he'd either ignore us or blurt out nonsense. Cowboy hat, or random animal names while nervously giggling. For weeks, we tried everything. We searched every inch of the room, checked for strange noises, bad smells. Nothing. We asked if he saw something scary, but he would just shake his head and bury his face in my shirt. We were exhausted. I ended up sleeping in his room while my husband took our bed just to see if I could figure out what was bothering him. Then, on July 23rd, I finally heard something. Around 3 p.m., I was grabbing something from his room when I heard an odd scuffling sound above me. Something moving on the roof. It wasn't rain, and it wasn't the usual creaks of the house settling. It sounded deliberate, like footsteps. At first I thought, maybe a squirrel? But then I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. Our roof was metal. I'd lived here almost a year and had never once heard an animal move across it before. And worse, why would a noise on the roof scare my son so much that he wouldn't even step inside his room? That night, I barely slept. I kept the lights on, listening for anything unusual. Around 2 a.m., I heard the faintest tap, 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 tap. It wasn't coming from the roof. It was coming from inside the room, from the closed bathroom door. I held my breath, my heart pounding. Slowly, I got up and stepped toward the door. The air in the room felt wrong, like the pressure had changed. My fingers hovered over the doorknob when suddenly, scratch! Something scratched from the other side of the door. I bolted. I grabbed my son and slept in the living room that night. The next morning, I checked the bathroom. Nothing. But when I looked closer, I saw faint marks on the wood, long, thin scratches that hadn't been there before. I don't know what my son saw that night, but I do know one thing. He was right to be afraid. For months, my mom's friend noticed odd things happening in her house. Soup cans disappearing faster than she remembered, eggs missing, and damp towels in the hamper when she hadn't used any. She chalked it up to forgetfulness. Maybe she was just misplacing things. But then she started hearing noises, soft shuffling, faint thuds, always from the attic. One night, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right, she grabbed a flashlight and climbed up to check. What she found made her stomach drop. There was a makeshift living space, a small radio, a hot plate, a sleeping bag, crumpled food wrappers. Someone had been living there, watching her, moving through her house when she wasn't looking. Panicked, she called the cops. They staked out the house, waiting. And sure enough, around midnight, they caught him, a gaunt man with sunken eyes, slipping down from the attic. But here's the part that still gives me chills. When they arrested him, he didn't fight. He just looked at her and smiled. "I was careful," he said. "You weren't supposed to notice me. That's when they found his journal. He'd been keeping notes, logs of her daily routine, what time she left, when she went to bed, things she muttered to herself while alone. And on the last page, a single sentence: I think she knows. Let me know if you'd like any further tweaks. The eyes in the dark story with a different twist, making it more psychological and eerie. The eyes that followed me. I grew up on the edge of a dense national forest in the southern U.S., where the nights were thick with the sounds of insects, rustling leaves, and the occasional distant howl. My family had always dealt with armadillos tearing up my mother's garden, so it became routine to patrol the backyard with a shotgun, making sure nothing was lurking around. One particularly humid summer night, I stepped outside, shotgun in hand, and took my usual path around the property. But something was different. The air felt heavy. The usual symphony of crickets and frogs had gone completely silent. A deep unease settled in my chest, and I tightened my grip on the shotgun. My flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping over the towering tree line about 50 yards away. That's when I saw them. Two glowing red eyes staring right at me. At first, I told myself it had to be an animal. Maybe a fox, maybe a deer caught at an odd angle. But these eyes were too far apart. They hovered about 4 feet off the ground. No body, no movement, no reflection of fur. Just the eyes, watching. A chill ran down my spine. I had hunted in these woods my whole life. Wild hogs, mountain lions, even ran into a bear once. But nothing had ever made me feel this way. This wasn't an animal. I took a step back, the barrel of my shotgun trembling slightly. My gut screamed at me to run, but my legs were frozen. Then the air changed. A guttural growl echoed from the darkness, not like any animal I'd ever heard. It wasn't deep or throaty. It was layered, like multiple voices growling in unison. I fired. The flash of the shotgun lit up the trees, but the eyes didn't flinch, they just stared. And then they multiplied. Then they multiplied. One pair of eyes became 2, then 4, then 8, each identical, each locked onto me. I stumbled backward, reloading with shaking hands. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I fired again, and the instant the flash illuminated the woods, the eyes were gone. But the silence remained, stretching thick and suffocating. I turned and ran. I don't even remember getting to the door, only the feeling of sheer panic clawing at my chest. I slammed the door shut, bolted the locks, and turned on every light in the house. I barely slept that night. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the house made my heart hammer. By morning, I convinced myself it had been a trick of the light. Exhaustion. Maybe some local predator I just hadn't recognized. But as I stepped onto the porch, something stopped me dead in my tracks. In the dirt, just beyond the tree line, were footprints, human footprints. But the stride was impossibly long, and there were no signs of anything walking away. I moved out 2 weeks later. I never saw the eyes again, but some nights when everything goes too quiet, I swear I can still feel them watching. This version leans into psychological horror. Nash, The Last Turn. James Carter had always been a man who lived for the thrill of the road. As a successful businessman in his early 40s, he had finally treated himself to something he had dreamed of for years: an Audi A4 convertible. It was sleek, powerful, and packed with cutting-edge safety features, including its famous pop-up roll hoops, hidden unless triggered by a rollover. For months, James drove the car with pride, feeling the wind rush past him on long drives through winding roads. Friends envied his purchase, and he often bragged about the car's innovative safety features. "This thing could save my life in a crash," he would say with confidence. Little did he know, he would soon put that claim to the ultimate test. The crash! It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and James was driving down a scenic countryside road. The golden leaves fluttered around him as he navigated the curves, music playing softly through the speakers. He was in no rush, just enjoying the ride. Then, in a split second, everything changed. As he approached a sharp bend, his tires hit a patch of damp leaves. The car's rear wheels lost traction, sending him into a skid. He instinctively gripped the wheel, trying to regain control, but the momentum was too strong. The car veered off the road, crashing through the guardrail. For a moment, there was silence, just the sensation of weightlessness as the vehicle plummeted. Then, A violent jolt as the car tumbled down a steep embankment, smashing through underbrush and small trees before finally coming to a halt, upright, at the bottom of the slope. The pop-up roll hoops had deployed perfectly, protecting him from being crushed. Dazed, James sat there for a moment, heart pounding. Then, slowly, he moved his hands, his legs. Everything seemed intact. Breathing heavily, he unbuckled his seatbelt and pushed open the door. The cool air rushed in, mixing with the scent of gasoline and crushed leaves. With shaky legs, he climbed out of the wreck, brushing dirt off his jacket. Aside from a few cuts and bruises, he was fine. Miraculously fine. The final moment. With effort, James made his way back up the embankment, one step at a time, until he reached the roadside. Pulling out his phone, he dialed the police to report the accident. Relief washed over him. He had survived what could have been a fatal crash. A few minutes later, a car pulled up. The driver had seen everything and rushed over to check on him. "Hey man, are you all right?" the stranger asked as he approached. James, still catching his breath, smiled and turned to reply. And in that instant, he collapsed. His body hit the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. The other driver gasped, kneeling beside him, shaking his shoulder. But James didn't move. He was gone. The silent killer. Later, paramedics and police arrived, trying to make sense of what had happened. His body showed no external trauma severe enough to explain his sudden death. Then, a closer examination revealed the terrible truth. During the crash, the force of the impact had fractured James's neck. However, the bones had remained in place until the moment he turned his head. That single casual movement had severed his spinal cord instantly, killing him on the spot. The car's safety features had done their job, but fate had one final cruel twist in store. And so, the man who had always trusted in technology's ability to protect him met his end, not in the crash itself, but in the simplest of actions. A turn of the story. I don't scare easily. I've always been the kind of person who watches horror movies alone at night, laughs at ghost stories, and rolls my eyes when someone claims their house is haunted. But last night, something happened, and I don't know how to explain it. It started around 2:37 a.m. I know the exact time because I woke up suddenly, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. It felt like something had jerked me out of my sleep. At first, everything seemed normal. My room was dark except for the dim glow of the streetlight outside. My phone was on my nightstand, notifications silent. The only sound was the hum of my ceiling fan. Then I noticed it. The closet door. I always keep my closet shut, always. But now it was slightly open, just a few inches. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. I was sure it had been closed when I went to bed. A cold feeling crept over me. Had I forgotten? Maybe I was just being paranoid. I told myself it was nothing. I got up, walked over, and shut the door, firmly. Then I climbed back into bed and pulled the covers over my head, feeling foolish. And that's when I heard it, a soft creak, like the sound of a door slowly opening. I froze. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But then footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Moving across my room. I couldn't breathe. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it was just my imagination. Then, right next to my bed, I heard a whisper. "I know you're awake." I've never moved so fast in my life. I jumped out of bed, flipped on the light, and there was nothing there. The closet door was wide open. My room was empty. But I swear as I stood there, gasping for air, I felt something watching me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. And I haven't slept since. Because no matter where I go, I keep hearing it. "I know you're awake, and I'm scared." This should run. The roommate I never had. Moving to a new city was supposed to be exciting. A fresh start, a new job, and an affordable apartment in a decent neighborhood. Everything seemed perfect, until I started noticing strange things. It started with little details. The bathroom mirror would have streaks on it, as if someone had wiped it down. But I hadn't touched it. My fridge door would be slightly open in the mornings, even though I always made sure to close it. I chalked it up to forgetfulness. I was tired, adjusting to a new routine. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Then one night, I came home from work and found the TV on. A news channel was playing. I never watched the news. I checked the locks, the windows, everything was secure. My landlord had assured me that no one else had a key. So I turned off the TV, locked my bedroom door, and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, my bedroom door was wide open. I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe I hadn't shut it properly. Maybe the latch was loose. But deep down, a feeling of unease settled in my stomach. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint, just outside my door. I held my breath, straining to listen. The words were unclear, but the voice was soft, almost pleading. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, throwing the door open. Nothing. My apartment was empty. I barely slept that night. The next day, I came home from work and found a cup of water sitting on the kitchen counter. I hadn't used a glass that morning. My anxiety skyrocketed. I checked every inch of the apartment, every closet, every cabinet. No one was there. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A Post-it note stuck to the fridge. 3 words. Why did you leave? I didn't write that. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. You don't have to be scared. I've always lived here. I moved out the next morning. To this day, I don't know who or what was sharing that apartment with me. But sometimes late at night, I wonder, did I leave them behind? Or did they follow me? The disappearing boy. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other. Nothing exciting ever happened until the summer of 2003 when a boy from my neighborhood vanished. His name was Eric. We weren't close, but I saw him around. He rode his bike everywhere, always wore the same red hoodie, and had a habit of whistling random tunes as he walked. Then, one day, he was just gone. The police searched for weeks, but they found nothing. No witnesses, no clues. His parents moved away, heartbroken. Eventually, people stopped talking about it. I never did, because I kept seeing him. It started a year after he disappeared. I was walking home from school when I heard whistling behind me. That same random tune Eric always whistled. I turned around. No one was there. Over the years, it happened again and again. A glimpse of a red hoodie on a crowded street. The sound of a bike chain clicking behind me. The feeling that someone was watching me. I tried to convince myself it was in my head. Until the night I saw him. In my backyard. It was late. I got up to grab some water when I noticed movement outside my window. A shadow standing by the tree line. I turned on the porch light. It was Eric. Same red hoodie, same bike, same blank expression. But something was wrong. His face was pale, his eyes sunken in. He opened his mouth as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. I blinked. He was gone. The next morning, I told my parents. They didn't believe me, of course. It's been years, they said. Your mind's playing tricks on you. But I knew what I saw. A few days later, I heard the whistling again. Closer this time. I ran inside and locked my door. That night, I dreamed about Eric. He was standing in my room, staring at me. His mouth was moving, but there was no sound. I woke up to a notification on my phone. An unknown number. A video message. I hesitated before pressing play. The screen was dark, the camera shaky, like it had been recorded in a hurry. Then, the image cleared, and I saw Eric, standing in the woods behind my house, whispering something I couldn't hear. Suddenly, he turned, looking right at the camera, right at me. Then the screen cut to black. I moved away the next week. But sometimes, when I walk alone at night, I still hear that tune, whistled softly, just behind me. And I know he's still there. Before my dad passed away, he shared a story from his time in Vietnam during the 1960s, a story he had kept to himself for decades. He and another American, along with 5 CIDG strikers, South Vietnamese villagers turned fighters, were on a classified mission deep in the jungle, tasked with planting seismic ground sensors along a trail network. 2 days in, he and 2 of the strikers broke away from the main group to monitor a nearby trail intersection, a known hotspot for enemy movement. The jungle was eerily quiet that day. Too quiet. Only the occasional bird call or rustling in the canopy broke the silence. They had been watching the intersection for hours, debating their next move. As they prepared to leave, my dad scanned the trail one last time. And that's when he saw something impossible. Lying just shy of the intersection was a soldier. But not just any soldier. This man was dressed in full Union cavalry gear from the Civil War era. His uniform was pristine, as if he had just stepped out of history. He carried 2 pistols, a Spencer rifle, and at his hip a short, curved club. My dad froze, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. The soldier, as if aware of my dad's confusion, turned his head and smiled. Calm, almost knowing. Then he lifted a finger to his lips in a silent warning. Before my dad could react, the soldier gestured for him to back away. Without thinking, my dad signaled his men to remain hidden and slowly faded into the jungle's shadows. The soldier did the same on his side of the trail. Mere seconds later, a column of NVA soldiers, 70, maybe 80 men, marched straight through the intersection. Had my dad and his team been exposed, they would have been wiped out instantly. Once the enemy soldiers were gone, my dad's instincts screamed at him to retreat. He and his men slipped away, rejoining the main patrol. He never spoke of what he saw, not to his unit, not in his reports. It was too strange, too unexplainable. For years, he carried this secret, only revealing it to me on his deathbed. But what he said next chilled me to my core. When I told my grandmother what I had seen, he whispered, she just smiled. Without even opening her eyes, she said, "You saw old Red Tom." Red Tom, as it turns out, was my great-great-grandfather, a half-black, half-Creek scout who had fought with the Union Army during the Civil War. He was known for carrying 2 pistols, a Spencer rifle, and a Creek war club into battle. Exactly like the soldier my father had seen in the jungle. But how? If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling stories. Who knows? The next mystery might be closer than you think.